So let's pivot into creating environments, contexts for mistakes to be, I don't want to say encouraged, but at least celebrated. And
Sure.
as a kind of a CEO of a kind of a technology startup once shared with me, this was one of their mantras in the company. It's now gotten to be a large company, but he said, don't throw away something that didn't work. Like put it in the parts bin, because there might be part of it that we can pull off later and use for something else.
Right.
So how do you create those kind of environments or that kind of spirit? What have you seen work?
So I think a lot of it comes back to there's a concept that has really been framed and popularized by Professor Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School of what she calls psychological safety.
Yeah.
Which, amongst other things, it's a safety to speak up with an idea, to challenge the status quo, to point out and to admit, hey, I've made a mistake, in a way that is safe from blame, retaliation, humiliation, things like that. And I think, Toyota has done an amazing job of trying to create that culture. If you have a chance to, you can do a virtual tour online these days. Toyota has something they call the andon cord. Andon just means signal. And if there is a problem, or even as a production worker, if I've made a mistake where I grab a part and before I can install it, I drop that part. I think of like where I started my career at General Motors, in a blame and shame culture, you would get yelled at for dropping the part. And so then you might be tempted to cover up, like, did anyone see me drop that part? No? Okay, I'm going to install it, and it might be defective, but you know what? It's not my problem anymore. Someone else will catch it or fix it or whatever. So creating that safety for someone to reach up and physically pull a cord that calls their team leader over, where the culture would be to say, I dropped the part. And then the team leader would help with the immediate aftermath of, let's make sure this part doesn't get used. Let me get you a replacement. But then if that part's being dropped a lot, you would stop and say, is that part too slippery? Right? You start looking for design or system elements. Are other people also dropping that part? Right? So you don't just lecture the worker for being clumsy or, God forbid, fire them. So how you respond when people point out a problem is really critically important. When I've been working in healthcare, there's this very common dynamic. People will talk about naming, blaming, and shaming. And it's completely counterproductive when there's a mistake or an error that harms a patient. The blame and shame cycle leads, again, to people hiding and covering up the problem. And when we can't admit there's a problem, we can't have any hope of addressing it constructively in a way that eliminates the risk of that problem reoccurring.
I think that's really, really all very powerful. Have you ever seen any cases where managers and leaders have actually facilitated conversations around, almost like your podcast, like, well, let's everyone go around and talk about our favorite mistake, what we can learn from that?
I've had at least one guest, maybe two, if I'm not making a mistake with my memory. And that's a human dynamic there. Our memories are not perfect. But at least one guest talked about within their company, they had a monthly contest for, I think they framed it as the best mistake or the mistake of the month. And, it wasn't a huge financial reward. I mean, I don't think they were afraid that people were going to start intentionally doing things wrong so they could win the mistake of the month award. But, doing things that just sort of, I think normalize the fact that we're human, we make mistakes. We need to recognize that. And, celebrate is an interesting word. Like, I don't know if it's really celebrate as much as it is acknowledge.